Right, this episode, we think you'll love this.
Hello, Ian here from It's All Kicking Off, and I'm joined once again by Chris Sutton. This week I defend my stance after Newcastle fans hammered me for saying Dan Burns' England debut is far from perfect. We also question Thomas Tuchel's public criticism of his star players, and we have our say on the war of words between Dwight Gale and Steve Bruce.
Welcome to Alas Vine and Hitchens. I'm Sarah Vine.
And I am Peter Hitchens.
And today we're going to kick off with Peter's big idea. You're going to introduce it, Peter.
Which is my loathing of television, one of two great disasters which have befallen mankind during the 20th century and continue to plague us, the other one being cars. But television, the invention of television, has been so destructive of culture and thought and imagination and education that I think if we could go back and stop it being invented, kidnap John Logie Baird, who was supposed to invent it here and whoever did it in the US, and stop them from ever inventing it. I think if we thought seriously about it, we would. Back in the very early 50s, when television was incredibly rare in this country, but still common, but already common in the United States, T.S. Eliot, the great poet and thinker, wrote a letter to the Times saying that because he was half American, he had many, many conversations with friends in the United States about the appalling effects of television, particularly on children, on their imagination, on their concentration, on their engagement with culture, on their reading. And shouldn't something be done to try and prevent its spread here? And the letter was completely ignored, and I think it shouldn't have been. If you just look at what's happened since it came into being, one of the main things about it is that it stops people from imagining things for themselves. Well, what does that matter? So I would say all the major moral questions of life are resolved in the imagination. If you've got a developed imagination, then you have a developed conscience. You will be much more interested in what other people are thinking and doing and how your actions might affect them. Television will actually atrophy that side of the human person and make people think that the whole world is some kind of show. That's the most fundamental thing.
Well, I think it's so interesting. I would normally disagree with you, but having watched Kat Deely try to put 7 apples in her mouth on breakfast television the other day, or whatever she was trying to do.
I saw the pictures of 3 wagon wheels.
I'm inclined to agree. I mean, the thing is, you could almost be talking about mobile telephones, couldn't you?
Well, they're an extension of the same thing.
So this idea that people are just endlessly on receive so that their ideas and their brains become very lazy. I mean, I think when you talk about imagination, I think boredom is a very key and important factor in a child's life. It's important for children to be bored because then when they're bored, they come up with interesting things to do to alleviate their boredom. Although I would say in the case of my daughter, sometimes not always good things for her to be doing. But you know what I mean. That boredom is an important thing. I mean, I have to say I grew up without television because I grew up abroad, and abroad didn't have television when I was a child. We had something called, there was a bit of Italian television, but it was mostly run by Silvio Berlusconi, and my mother refused to have a television in the house on the basis that she didn't want me watching housewives getting undressed for money, which was basically what he was broadcasting. So I did grow up without television, and I have to say that when I used to come back to the UK, I would fall upon the television like a drowning, like a sort of starving woman, because I was so deprived of it. And the idea, and being able to watch things like Jackanory and all those children's programs. And again, my mother was very funny. She used to police the television quite strictly. I wasn't allowed to watch ITV unless, I think it was on ITV, but there were 2 shows that I was allowed to watch. One was the Anedian Line. Do you remember that?
I do remember it.
Very good. And the other one was Miami 5-0 because my father used to like it because it had lots of naked ladies in it.
Hawaii, surely?
Hawaii 5-0, that's right.
The Miami was something else, wasn't it?
Miami was something else. But the point is that I loved it because as a child, I loved it in the way that children love a bag of sweets. You know what I mean?
Oh, completely.
It was delicious and addictive and probably not very good for me.
But like sweets, parents shouldn't allow children to eat sweets uncontrolled. Yes. They should always control the supply.
So my point,
same being with television. I remember the first time I saw television, it must have been, we didn't have one in my I suppose, the first 9 years of my life. And we weren't allowed at the boarding schools I attended either. But I remember my parents visiting a friend in London and me seeing it for the first time. It was in those days when televisions used to have doors, and they opened the doors and showed. All I can remember is a picture of some American steam train rushing across the screen in black and white. I was completely captivated and sat there with my mouth hanging open. Then my parents decided that we would get a television, and my late brother and I must have spent appalling amounts of time watching imported American rubbish. I can still
but maybe
remember
that's why you're such brilliant.
Theme tunes are, my argument is actually how much more brilliant we would have been had we not been.
I don't know.
I have when I read. I have to say something here because it's important. When I look at what the children and the university students of the pre-television era used to read, how much they used to read, how much more knowledgeable they were, particularly I have to say about the classics.
Yes.
And compare that with my pitiful knowledge of the world, I do blame the fact.
Do you think people
from an early age I had my imagination
do you think people would have
sailed.
said that, of the printing press? Oh, all these books that people are reading.
There is some truth in it.
Them from and also of theatre.
Printing does the printed word does actually destroy the memory, and people in pre-literate societies people do have better memories. But I think that's a trade-off. That's a trade-off I'm prepared to accept because although you don't have the memory, you can look it up.
Yeah.
But television doesn't provide a trade-off. It just takes away your imagination.
I disagree. So I think some television. So I think like everything, if you have to control access to it and you have to be moderate about it. So obviously, if you let your child watch Peppa Pig 24 hours a day, they're never going to develop into anything. And you see it a lot these days with iPads, which are basically portable televisions. You go into any restaurant at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and you'll find that there are lots of little kiddies all sitting around basically with their mouths hanging open watching whatever it is they're watching. The point is you have to, as a society and as parents, and you have to ration these things. So that's why one of the things that I think is quite worrying and possibly quite damaging is the advent of streaming. Because with streaming, you can theoretically just sit and watch an entire show all in one go. In the olden days, you had to wait. So there was scheduling. So nobody watched television during the day because everyone was busy working, whatever.
It wasn't on.
It wasn't on.
A lot of the time.
There was nothing
do you remember
on
the test card?
Yes, the little girl with the what was it, the teddy bear she had? I can't remember. Was it?
It was a clown.
It was a clown.
But before that, there was just a test card with crisscross patterns in black and white.
You got home and you had a sort of window of 2 hours where you would watch television. I think that's completely fine. But now people just do it constantly. I remember one time we went to when my daughter was in a particularly challenging phase of her teenagehood. We went to New York and she got jet lag. She'd never been, she'd never done a time zone thing. So she couldn't sleep. So she started watching Grey's Anatomy, and then she would stay up all night watching Grey's Anatomy because it was just every new episode would just come up, and she got to the point where she was unable to function during the day because she was so tired and so full of Grey's Anatomy. So the problem is, it's like anything, wine, cigarettes, I don't know, cake, a little bit is fine. If you immerse yourself totally in it, it's not. And that's what's happened with TV. And scheduled TV is dying. Nobody watches telly anymore in the old-fashioned way. They just get their app up and they watch the show that they like.
That's interesting, and I think there are differences. I mean, for instance, when people used to watch, for instance, the really huge programs like Steptoe and Son, which had audiences of millions, beyond the dreams of anyone making television programs these days. And then people the following day would actually talk about what they'd seen on the television. There was something sort of socially beneficial, I suppose, about that in bringing people together as a country, and that's all gone. And streaming is partly to do with that. But when video recorders came in, of course, the great thing that did, by enabling you to watch it when you wanted to, was to read the previews, which always said the programs were good, and then read the reviews, which almost always said they were terrible. And then most of the programs I recorded when we had a VCR, I never watched.
Well, I used to work as a TV...
I stopped watching it, but that was phase 3 of my television life. When we came to live in London and lived in a tiny flat, we were determined to be culturally pure.
Right.
And we didn't have a television set.
Okay.
And then along came, and we managed fine without it, and then along came the original series on television with Alec Guinness of Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy,
Yeah.
and I would beg friends to let us come round and watch it. And after about 3 episodes, this is just too
Do they all club
embarrassing.
together and just buy you
And
a
I went
television?
to a rather intellectually snobbish television hire company called Drazin's in Hampstead High Street, and we rented a very small television from them and watched it.
I
on
used to
that.
get my
And after
television
that,
on
the thing
radio
was
rentals.
in. We would watch the news, but also rubbish like Minder and the Professionals and all kinds of stuff like that. Almost immediately our brains began to soften in general.
I think this is you. I think you have a problem
No,
with
no, since I've
self-restraint,
stopped.
Peter.
I've got
I think
what?
you. I think you.
I do. I have a huge problem with self-restraint. Haven't you noticed?
I think you just need to be stricter with yourself.
Well, I am. This is like this is like the Evelyn Waugh Nancy Mitford conversation in which Nancy Mitford said to Evelyn, "Why, if you make such a business about being a Catholic, and yet you're so absolutely horrible?" And he said, "Well, just imagine how much more horrible I would be if it weren't for being a Catholic."
I know. It's like
This is me. I am restraining myself. This is what I like when I am restraining myself. You don't want to meet the other guy.
Well, I think maybe I do.
No, you
I
don't.
think he sounds like a lot of fun. But yes, okay. Well, I understand. I understand what you're saying, but I still think that television has produced.
I hear what you say.
I have to say, again, as somebody who grew up with that. Also, I wouldn't have a job in journalism were it not for television, because, of course, my first job in journalism was being a TV listings sub-editor on the Daily Mirror.
But this was the tragedy of our trade, that we became the servants of the medium which was destroying us.
Well, I don't know. I was quite well-
right up until the 1970s, newspapers were many people's first source of news.
Yeah, no, that's
I
true.
sometimes bought 5 or 6 evening papers a day in London,
Yes.
because the news channel there was no rolling news on TV or radio, and then it became more and more apparent that our readers were actually getting the news on television. All that race to get the latest possible news on the front page, a complete waste of time. You had to turn newspapers, as they did, into
Did you
daily
ever watch
magazines, which we have become, and we became the servants of TV in many ways,
Slaves,
promoting
indeed.
it a lot as well.
Did you ever watch The Wonder Years?
No.
There's a great show about a little boy who grew up watching only television, and if you're interested in it, it's quite a good. I don't think you can. I'm not sure you can even get it anymore, but it was very good. I used to love it.
There was that film, wasn't there, the Being There film, about when Peter Sellers
Yes.
played a man who'd spent his entire life sitting in a basement watching television, and he came outside when his whoever was employing him died, and he eventually came outside with the remote control in his hand and tried to switch people off in the street.
Well, that's a lovely idea. I like the
Well,
idea
it didn't
of being able
work.
to do that.
They wouldn't.
But
stop.
I do still think that television has. I know everybody hates the BBC, and that's fine. But I have to
don't
say,
hate it.
I think some of the television that this country has produced has been amazing. I mean, culturally and artistically, you can't just put it all in the same bucket.
No, I don't. But it won't. But that's always those marvelous nature programs. Well, indeed, there are marvelous nature programs. But this is always used as an excuse by people who want to leave their children in the charge of the third parent while they get on with their lives.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say that I think my poor parents, getting pretty sick of the way that my brother and I used to constantly fight each other, thought that by plonking us in front of this flickering screen that they might get a bit of peace and quiet.
And did they? Yes.
And they did.
Yes. Wonder what parents did before television. Well, maybe one.
Well,
of
they
our,
let us out. They opened the door and let us out like
wildebeest,
pets.
like dogs.
Yeah, out we went, and they did that too. We did. I can still remember that. Off you go.
Off you go. Yes, I was.
See you later.
We didn't have a television, and I was let out, and I used to spend most of my time looking for snakes in the garden.
Really?
Tiny little snakes. I was kind
Italian snakes.
Italian snakes.
Are they,
yes.
are they deadly?
No, they're just little grass snakes, and I, a lot of times sort of staring into the sky. I mean, I remember being so fantastically bored as a child.
I'm sure this is so good for you. No, I'm absolutely no. I know. I'm not being funny. I think boredom is vital. You have to endure it.
Yeah.
To kick off the imagination and the desire to think.
Things like frog spawn. I used to go and sort of collect frog spawn and look at it in jars, and a lot of that sort of stuff used to go on. And I was just bored.
Children had hobbies. They did bizarre things like collecting stamps.
To friends in foreign
stamps never
countries.
did it for me. I did collect coins though. I still love coins. I still think they're completely fascinating. But you did things like that.
Yes, you did.
I like collecting things.
Yeah, and also sort of playing musical instruments and things like that. We used to do a lot
I'm
more.
afraid I never did. We played a surprising amount of cards though. I remember in those cold, silent weeks after between
We used to play mahjong.
between the end of Christmas and the start of the school term. We played a surprising amount of quite complicated card games. I remember whist we had a very nice set of old Edwardian cards. I couldn't play whist now to save my life, but I knew all the rules, and chess.
Yes. Well, I was forced to play mahjong, which I found quite tiresome, and chess, which I also found quite tiresome because I don't really have that kind of brain.
I don't
But
believe
yeah, I
you.
used to do a lot of drawing, actually. That's what
Yeah.
I used to mainly do. I used to draw things, and I remember I got so bored one summer, I spent most of it covering all of the books in my parents' bookshelves in identical white paper. So I sort of turned the whole thing white.
I used to produce a small family newspaper,
Well, there you go.
which, to my total astonishment, I know this and I remember it quite clearly, was mainly concerned with cricket scores.
Was it called the Daily
Hampshire
Cricket?
County Cricket. Well, no, it wasn't. But that's a discussion.
Yes, I think
for
we're
another
digressing
time.
now. I think
But it's true.
yes.
But that was when there was no daytime TV, and it's when it
Exactly.
expanded into daytime that I think it really killed
Yeah.
what remained of our culture.
Yes, I think exactly. It became 24-hour. It became all over the place. Every screen, everything is now filled with television. But I still don't think it's a bad invention. Anyway, I wonder what our listeners think. Let us know. You can email us.
Try to imagine the world without it, is what I say.
Try to imagine a world without television. Well, I mean, you could do 24 hours without it, see what it's actually like. It's not that bad. I don't ever turn my television on at home.
No, generally I watch old things.
Yes.
Or sometimes stream things.
You can email us, alas@mailonline.co.uk. You can leave a comment on Spotify or send us a voice note on WhatsApp 07796 657 512. Start your message with the word alas. What do you think? Is Peter right? Is television useless? Should we ban it?
And now we shall have
Or
some.
does Peter just have no self-restraint at all?
And now we shall have some 1960s commercials to fill the gap.
Join us after
This
the
is
break.
Luxury You Can Afford by Cyril Lord. You're too young to remember that.
don't remember
It's carpet.
Carpet?
Yeah, he got a subsidy to make carpets in Northern Ireland, and they cost almost nothing, and he constantly advertised them. And then there was also connected with carpets, bizarrely, 1001 cleans a big carpet for less than £0.50. Endlessly repeated slogan, and it's still there in my mind. I can't get either of those out. There are others too.
I can
those,
see this
those
has been
are
very
really
traumatic for you, Peter.
You'll never learn with a strand.
Stop.
Cigarette advertising was
call in the-
really, I just would not stop.
Call the doctor. Nurse.
You can't call the doctor, they're never there.
Hello, I'm Sarah Vine
And I am Peter Hitchens.
from the Alas, Vine and Hitchens podcast. We really hope you are enjoying listening to the show as much as we enjoy making it and would love to make it even better. So, we are running a short survey to find out more about you so that we can continue to bring you episodes that'll help you find the answers to the big questions. It only takes 2 minutes. You can find the link in the show notes. Thanks so much. I know it's annoying. Now back to the episode.
If you like this episode, we think you'll love this.
Hello, Ian here from It's All Kicking Off, and I'm joined once again by Chris Sutton. This week I defend my stance after Newcastle fans hammered me for saying Dan Burns' England debut was far from perfect. We also question Thomas Tuchel's public criticism of his star players, and we have our say on the war of words between Dwight Gale and Steve Bruce.
Welcome back to Alas, Vine and Hitchens. I am Sarah Vine.
And I am Peter Hitchens.
And now we're coming to my topic, which is tax. And I can't do all the swearing that I would like to do. But
Let's just imagine it, shall we?
yes, just imagine the swearing.
Just take a moment
So,
and imagine
the reason
Sarah's swearing.
So it's yes, many expletives. So the Inland Revenue have just become incredibly rapacious and difficult to deal with. It used to be the case that if you had a problem with your tax or you needed some help, whatever, you could just ring them up and they would help you, and they would be quite sort of, they would be genuinely helpful. But now they've just sort of they've turned into basically sort of state-sponsored bailiffs, as far as I can tell. A friend of mine who is self-employed, she got in a muddle with her tax because it's so complicated now, and she can't really afford a proper accountant. And she got in a muddle with it and got it wrong. And they actually sent someone to her front door, which is terrifying for most people. And they hadn't sent her any warnings of this, despite the fact they have her details. They hadn't bothered to pick up the phone.
Well, they might have sent her warnings, but then that other great state institution, the post office, might not have delivered
Well, exactly.
them.
I mean, the first thing literally, she was out at the time. Her daughter answered the door. She then had this awful sort of kind of toing and froing. But they treat everybody, or it seems to me, I mean, this is not a unique story. I mean, I have one friend who's had to take some money out of his pension to get them off his back. And the thing is, they treat everyone like a criminal. And that's the awful thing about it, because their slogan, tax needn't be taxed, it's all fine. Don't mind paying the tax. Absolutely don't mind paying the tax. Quite annoyed that it usually gets spaffed on stupid things that we don't actually need or want, or that all our public services are rubbish, but that's a whole other discussion. I don't mind paying my tax. But I just don't want to be treated as though I'm a sort of criminal. And it seems to be that they just go for the sort of low-hanging fruit. They never go for Mr. Bezos or gigantic rich corporations that are doing all sorts of fancy stuff because they've got teams of corporate accountants. They go for the cleaning lady who's self-employed. But the other thing that really drives me insane, and I don't know who brought this rule in, is that if you're self-employed, which lots of people are now, because thanks to the new government's national insurance rubbish, no one is actually going to be given a proper job that is PAYE. Everyone will have to be self-employed. If you're self-employed, they calculate your tax based on what you earned the previous year, and then they demand the money up front. But what happens if you haven't had the same amount of work that you had last year? What are you supposed to do? It's just, the whole thing is so unfair, and it's so mean, and it's so depressing, I think, for ordinary people who, are not terribly financially minded, and they're expected to be accountants. Anyway, that's my rage.
It is an injustice, and the presumption of guilt is always wrong, and also when the state starts to bully the individual. One of the things I liked about Neil Kinnock when he was leader of the Labour Party was that he said the state should be under your feet, not above your head.
Completely right.
And this is one of the things that I'm not sure he actually meant this in particular when he said it, but it is an example of how it comes about. You can, and in this country for a long time there did exist a tax system which was actually quite reasonable. Why it's like this is fascinating. I think a lot of it is because of the mistaken merger. I think everybody in the business now recognises it was a mistake to merge what you still call the Inland Revenue, but it isn't anymore. It's a merger of the Inland Revenue and Customs. Now, Customs had a completely different job.
They're quite
and
aggressive.
What you're getting is actually Customs behaviour towards people who've evaded duty or are selling illegal cigarettes, or being applied to people who are just trying in a maze of figures and forms to try and pay the tax. This country is incredibly lucky because people are very willing to pay their taxes. I think you will find that in France and in Italy, for instance, people generally think that the tax system is a joke, and they don't pay it much. Here we pay.
Italy no one ever paid. Everybody evaded their taxes in Italy. I mean, it's much harder to do it now because everything's computerized. So it's actually just, until about 20 years ago, no one in Italy paid any tax. And the other thing that the HMRC have done is they're now slapping fines on people for being late.
But do you know where this is?
4,
this is the
5,
other thing.
6% on stuff. And the other thing, sorry.
Hang on, this morning. The morning of this Wednesday, the government announced that they had collected, yet again, less tax than they were spending. And this is why. The pressure is on. The pressure comes down from the Treasury onto HMRC.
Yeah.
We need more tax. Collect it. And so all the way down there, I don't know who works there. You don't meet or speak to them anymore, because the ones I used to speak to on the phone were generally quite nice to stay with. Yeah. The pressure is coming down from the Treasury. Collect more tax. Why isn't this coming in? And you feel that on your doorstep or wherever it is.
But also have the government, if you haven't got enough tax, don't spend the money. I mean, it's just...
Well, it's a very good idea, but you'll never come across a government that they would much rather come after you.
Waste that goes goes on, you know, and you just think, I don't mind paying my tax, but please don't just dribble it down the drain on nonsense. Well, and the other thing about having to pay...
intelligent, it doesn't matter what the party politics is, you need intelligent people in government.
Yeah.
I think you'll find that when Nigel Lawson was Chancellor, he took great efforts to make the tax code much simpler. And for a while, I remember
it was very simple.
The tax form you had to fill in was immensely short and simple. And then suddenly it began, I think Gordon Brown particularly, who was a man who tried to cover up what he was really doing with ingenuity. Under Gordon Brown, it began to resemble quite a long novel that you had to try and write on your own late at night with
no light.
Well, the thing is, you couldn't work out in many cases what it was they were asking because it was written in a language unknown to me. And that's another problem which comes in. But when you had Nigel Lawson, the human action by intelligent ministers of whatever party can sort this out. I think it's a very good subject. Yeah. I think that it would be if, for instance, the current opposition parties would come up, after what you said, would come up with a promise to straighten it out. I think an awful lot of people would vote for them.
Exactly, but also...
But you never hear that kind of thing discussed in politics, do you?
Understand that... You know, taxpayers are not criminals. You shouldn't send a bailiff to somebody's door. What are you going to do? What are they going to do? Take away your sofa? What's the taxman going to do with that? I mean, the whole thing is just ridiculous. And also, why can't you have, you know, if you think somebody's made a mistake in it, why can't you just pick up the phone and speak to them? Have you ever tried to get through to HMRC?
This is another of the COVID disasters that before the Great Panic, it wasn't that difficult to speak to HMRC. And then another thing happened. I used to file my tax return on paper because I believe I don't really like doing things, very private things, particularly on like tax returns on the internet. But for several years, I would send in my tax return and I would do it by recorded delivery. And then nothing would happen. And it began to seem to me that my form was arriving at some office far, far up away in the northwest of England, and nobody had opened the envelope yet. And I thought, I'm going to end up paying a fine for late filing because they haven't opened it. And I felt under pressure to go online for that. And eventually I did. I don't like it, but there it is. It's what you have to do. Again, so many of the difficulties come from the fact that people are no longer working in offices. If they're not working in offices, they're harder to contact.
Yeah, quite.
That's sorted out. But these things what you've raised is one of those things which an intelligent government could sort out without any great revolution at all.
Today we had another headline about the government have now got the highest level ever of death tax. I think it's 8.9 billion or something like that. And that system is insane. A lot of my friends, their parents are now dying, so I know a lot of people who've gone through this, the whole probate thing, and it is so rapacious and so horrible at a time when people are really upset. You know, their parent, whatever, has just died. You've got this sort of awful bullying behaviour, really. Give us your money, and you're just like, okay, fine, but can it not be done in a way?
Well, and inefficient. Because probate has fouled up. As far as I know, this is still going on. So it takes an immensely long time to get probate. But you're faced with demands to pay money, which you won't get until probate clears. So people are having to borrow money at quite high interest rates to pay their taxes.
Yes.
Because another branch of government is not functioning.
Which, by the way, this is a fixable
problem.
This idea that they always want the money before you've actually earned it or before you've got it. Well, what are they doing with the money? Well, they're getting the interest on it. Why the hell should they get the interest on it?
They're giving credit cards to civil servants to spend money on something. I know. I can't. And this is one of the reasons why this unless people do sort these things out, our current system of government cannot long be sustained. If the state continues to treat people with this level of contempt and to provide more and more miserable services in return for increasingly high taxes, it can't go on.
No.
There has to be a breaking point, and they must realize it. And this is when you get Donald Trump.
Exactly.
When you get a breaking point, you get Donald Trump. I don't think anybody.
Because as I say, I don't mind paying my tax. Paying the tax is not the issue. It's
being treated like dirt.
It's just being treated like dirt, and having to spend a lot of money on accountants in order to be able to do it right, because being terrified about not doing it right, and then the whole thing is just so stressful, and it's it's almost like the process is the punishment. Do you know what I mean? It's just really weird the way it's been set up. I don't understand it. And I mean, maybe you're right that Gordon Brown is responsible, but anyway,
He didn't help.
If I were Kemi Badenoch, I would really get someone clever to look into this.
Well, she
and
should
come up with a plan.
No, you're quite right. But this is the kind of thing which could actually revolutionise politics if the people would realise that actually most voters are sick of being treated like dirt.
But also that it's
and
a
ignored
contract.
and getting nothing for the money they hand over the government except insults and high-handed treatment. It just can't last.
I know, it's like,
It's like 18th century France. Eventually it bursts.
Yeah. And of course the thing is fewer and fewer people are bearing the tax burden. The thing is, you want to encourage people to do well and to earn money so that so you can have their taxes. But if you make them feel like there's no point because they're just going to have to pay, they're just going to have to jump through more hoops and be more insulted to pay more taxes, they're just going to give up. I mean, no wonder a lot of people...
Yeah, but deep down there is another problem, which is this country actually does spend, this country's government spends too much money.
Too much money.
And it demands too much money. It takes too much money from people who've worked to pay for it, and then it doesn't work itself. And I think, again, that is an absolute certain formula for national disaster. And we have to have governments recognising that we're spending way beyond our limits on things we can't afford. Don't tell me that you've got to spend, £30 billion on keeping the Ukraine war going. I don't want you to keep the Ukraine war going. I don't actually want you to do that. And it's money you haven't got.
I also don't
And you're going to come fairly soon along and take it away from me.
I also don't want money being given to the
that?
Chinese for a load of solar panels and wind farms that we shouldn't be doing. Do you know what I mean? There's all sorts of things.
The net zero thing is another torture.
Yeah. But the idea that on a sort of, I'm talking, on a personal level, on a people level, these are all big ideas, but on a people level, the idea that people are taking money out of their pension pot to pay off the tax man is really sad, because what's going to happen when they don't have enough pension? Who's going to have to look after them?
It's got out of hand.
The taxpayer.
It's got out of hand. Income tax was always regarded in free countries as an imposition. And it was first introduced in Napoleonic Wars in this country. It was then, what? An income tax? And then when the war was over, they actually got rid of it. When income tax was first introduced in the United States, hardly anybody paid it, and you had to go in for an individual appointment with the Internal Revenue Service if you were one of the very few people who actually fell within its limits. Most people didn't pay it. Now everybody's income is taxed in some way, and it just spreads and spreads and spreads.
But also the other thing
nobody
that
examines how a national audit of what we actually spend our money on. I don't believe in wars on waste and all the rest of it. There will be waste in any large system. But what I do believe in is a national, what are we actually spending this money on? Is it worth it? Do we really as a country want to continue spending beyond our means in this way? Because everybody who spends beyond their means, in the end, you know what happens to them.
Well, I mean, look how much we're borrowing. We're borrowing...
This is a sign it's really gone overboard. We are borrowing money to pay interest on our national debt. That
is really bad.
That means that we've gone beyond, way beyond the precipice.
If the government was a person, you would say, you'd have to get one of those money management people in to tell them not to spend so much money on coffees.
If the government was a person, you'd have him sectioned.
Yes, quite.
Actually.
Anyway, we'd love to hear from you, because I wonder how our listeners feel about tax, whether they have any stories to share, or indeed if any people from the Inland Revenue would like to defend their position. We would love to hear from you. You can email alas@mailonline.co.uk, or you can leave a comment, Spotify, or even send us a voice note on WhatsApp 077 96 657 512. And please start your message with the word alas.
If you like this episode, we think you'll love this.
Hello, Ian here from It's All Kicking Off, and I'm joined once again by Chris Sutton. This week I defend my stance after Newcastle fans hammered me for saying Dan Burns' England debut was far from perfect. We also question Thomas Tuchel's public criticism of his star players, and we have our say on the war of words between Dwight Gale and Steve Bruce.